Kaya yok sa tini. Washi sa ku. Kone adat ye has chi ne. Sheet kaku owe chosatin. Ayahai. Kawak shi ke has ausene. We ayahai. Eight hini dach aya ke has awa yak. Wasa achtu yak Ya yak atcha. Ach has you to us a good tsaa. A kade awe has a kawas chai. Ach saak has you to us a good. A kach aya a kawas chai. One means atsu has you to us a good. We show you what you do a sago at show you. We Japanese yu katangi. Dach sai llingit inach ach. Well, tellach to ashko we asa. Hilwasa oticho. We atlein ku has it to us a go wush to sek in owa at chai. Ya yagi a datea yuchagach tu laat. We an kasaku an saax'ú an saax'ú. Well, take a sa ach sayi tsaa sa ach sayi aya chune ach sayi aya chune an sayi yag katlach jini ak yada at kashle zanti Kayaaní. Atlein saak o kutzati yaha anikak. Ya achtiwasiku qunni aya haqidach away wududza ach ya shingit sai saax'ú. Ya away kleka sa ach sayi gwathacha sa ach saax'ú shingit anik saax'ú. Choidach nas jagun chaukunsa. Gwalli ide kakunik yata datsu. Echosugu yechwajian an kasaku. Gwalchayegu geng. Ade adach akanach akat widayacheti. Gulchi shech edisa achi achtuya ge wujin chasati yayegi. Gulchish. Oh, yek echosatin we chat the cook. NYO. Ya sandechak shui. Ye oa chosaku. Gulchish. Okay, so quick recap. I guess anything that you recognized or heard that I was saying. Anything at all? Oh, can't hear you. Yeah, so in Japanese, so we have two names for soy sauce. I don't really like either of them. So a student who knows Japanese suggested adopting the name shoyu, I think, which is a name for soy sauce in Japanese. And so we're saying shuyu because we don't have an O sound. And there is, but there kind of isn't. And when I say that, on the coast, you can say ho ho. And there's an O sound in there, that O. And if you're from the interior, especially Tessin or Carcross, if you have a U vowel, which could be or oo, and on either side of that, there's one of those characters with the underline that has the in the back of the throat, like the K, or the G, or the X. Any of those will trigger for inland speakers the oo sound to become an o sound. So like a box on the coast, you'd say kook. Not a Bentwood box, just some old box. Kook. But for the interior, they would say kook. So that's how I found out that I'm not trying to make fun of anybody else's language, but the village of Tok was just kind of funny for folks who were there because it sounds like Tok to them, which we would say Tuk, and that is a butt. And then I was talking about, yeah, so I started talking about foods. So I said I saw pictures that people were putting up in front of people. Hawakshiyir is in front of the eyes of the people. So that's how you would talk about demonstrating or sometimes sharing things. Like it works really well for like social media as people share photos. Ayahayi is a photo. So ayahayi kawakshiyiki has ausane. They put it in front of the eyes of the people, these photographs. And they were working on qaw, which is herring eggs. Underline G, high tone A, X apostrophe W. And so as we're learning Tlingit, sometimes people will be talking about qaw, and you'll say, something about a duck? Because that's ga, and they have similar sounds at the beginning and the end, but they're a little bit different because you got a back G, as opposed to a pizza burning zone G, g. And then you have the X with an apostrophe as opposed to an X, just a plain X. So, ga is duck, ga are herring eggs. And then I started talking about, it's very yummy. Some people like to pour seal oil, tsaa, on it. Some people like to pour hooligan oil on it, saak. And some people like to put soy sauce on it. And I guess there's mayonnaise too, which is gleit echi, I think we called it. It's white oil. And then I started talking about, I said, well, today I think I'm going to talk to you about, I was saying a bunch of stuff about sa, sa, an saax'ú, an kasai. Any guesses and predictions on those? Achsai aya chane. What does that say? Achsai aya chane.
My name is Kune.
My name is Chane. What about an kasai?
The name of the land.
Yeah, name on the land, an kasai. And then I was saying, so sai would be like the possessed form. So we might talk about that a little bit today. And then saax'ú or saa. So saak would be names. So here's another, like saak is a hat. Saax'ú are names. So you do get this in Tlingit sometimes, where you got these two things that sound very similar. And some of them are kind of, I guess, there's not a lot of potential danger if you accidentally said hat instead of names. But some of them, fart and feather are pretty close to each other. So, that happens sometimes. So then I was talking about, I think we're going to talk about some place names today, because we were talking about some last week, and now we're going to look at some kind of ones that are in the áax'w territory. And we can certainly go to other spots too. But then we're going to sort of use this to springboard into a discussion about a bit more of an advanced concept, but direction and location, where things are, if they're going to and from, or like we call them prepositions in English, but we call them Is that right? Yeah, we call them post positions in Tlingit because the pre is before and the post is after. And so we'll talk about this stuff a little bit. But and then we might talk about, I think I said something else, but I forget. So we'll see where we are once we're done with that. I was going to do like eating, drinking, foods, beverages, and we'll see if we get there or not. If not, we'll bump that to next week. But before we start that, anything you've been thinking about? Questions, ideas, thoughts? You could complain, but it has to be in Tlingit. I accept complaints in Tlingit. Which would be great, like, because then we could just gripe for like a while in Tlingit. We'll get there. Anything on your mind? Okay. Well, I was just in a school yesterday. It was very fun. And there's some potential to change. I think every school in Juneau should have a Tlingit name. And just a Tlingit, if you ask me. And so there's a school that's it's proposing a name change. And it's going to be KTOO. So it was really fun because I went in there, talked to the kids, and they all knew how to say it. They all knew how to, I thought I was going to teach them how to say the name. They already know, they all know how to say the name. So great job, teachers, administrators, workers in the school, parents, kids. And we're going to talk about names on the land. So we'll start here. So here's a bunch that are in this area. Collectively, we could call this area áax'w. That's probably the best name, I think, if you're going to talk about the whole Juneau area. Because we didn't really have, like, once you get into, like, when people say Juneau, they're kind of talking about way, sometimes way north of Juneau all the way to way kind of south. And so it's a pretty large area. And so when they get pretty large like that, you're really sort of getting into the whole kind of territory of the clan. So áax'w would be the people who are of the clans of this place. So you could be Tlingit, but still not be áax'w. And you could be non-Tlingit by birth, but be áax'w if they brought you into the clan. And so we're going to start with that name because it's a, and then I think I'll create another category right here. So let's see. So in this category, I'll show you the two little parts, the parts that are kind of in there. The way that names work is you have things and you smush them together. And there's a bit of a pattern when you smush things together. And it depends on what those things are. If you're taking a couple nouns and squishing them together, or if you're taking a verb. That's one of the big things is it a verb or not? Because if it is, then it's going to do a couple different things. So this first one is made up of two parts. So the word for lake is ah, and then there's a suffix on there which is little. And usually it's just this K. But some things have like a hidden rounded end. By rounded end, we mean it does end with the W, like the word gao. So if you say that slowly, or we say gao,
Cow.
gao.
Cow.
Cow.
So the kind of process that's going on is you're going ah, but then you're closing your lips, and that makes it go to ow. That's what makes that sort of ow sound at the end. So that's called a rounded end because your lips are going, they're rounding, right? And so some things just have a W on the end that pops up when you put a suffix on it. Not a whole lot of things, but some of them do. So let's say this first word right here. Ah,
Ah.
ah,
Ah.
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 So every time you go like see a doctor or something, they're having you say lake, right? Ah. Right. And then you put this on the end, and the K with the apostrophe goes, but with this W, you do have, it's like you have a little puff of air and you're kind of going at the end. That's your goal, is to try and go at the end. It's like you're just putting this little puff of air out, and your lips are rounded. So that sound is go. And so talking about this sound, so the K with the apostrophe. So just to sort of go over that again. So this K sound is just like in English. There's a whole bunch, car or whatever, and so there's a bunch of words that have this sound, not this, and so it's a K sound. K, k, k. So we know how to make that sound. But if you were to make that sound without using your lungs, that's what this apostrophe does. It says, wait, shut the lungs. Now go ahead and make the sound without using your lungs. And it is kind of challenging sometimes for folks who haven't spoken Tlingit before, or haven't spoken a lot, to make that sound. So you go from k to k, k. And then you're expected to use this little puff of air. So I guess the challenge would be to give everybody a little birthday candle, and then to have them go. And you gotta make a K sound and blow it out without using your lungs. And so that's the kind of challenge that we're trying to do. So when we put these together to say little lake, you have áax'w,
Ah,
Áax'w,
áax'w,
ah,
áax'w,
ah,
áax'w.
ah.
Okay, sheesh. And I'm gonna add one on here. So hold on. Move this whole thing up. Move this up. That's what I do. And we'll add one down the bottom. So this is little, this lake little. So that's how you make things small, is you put this little K at the end. So like hit is a house. Hitk would be a little house. Chak is an eagle. Chak, you'd have two of those in a row, would be a little eagle. And it makes, for Tlingit, that sound it makes things cute. They just get cute. That's just what happens. It's just little cute puppies, kittens, all that kind of stuff. And then it's also, if you pay attention to the kinship terms, the ones that end with this sound, that's endearment. For example, to say somebody's daughter, you might say do see. To say somebody's son, you might say do yeet. But if you're talking to them directly, you'd say sick, yitk. And you got that little, it's a love sound right at the end of that thing, that little K. And you could also say goodness shik. And it's not a little thank you, it's endearment. It's a very important sound in Tlingit. People used to make this sound to babies to go chuk. And it's a real contraction of chunk, which is grandchild. Chunk. Oh, that's a special term in Tlingit. So this next one, here's where you're going to see a pattern. So if some of you folks might be really into looking for the patterns. And the patterns, they reveal themselves. The more you learn Tlingit, the more these patterns just start emerging. And then all of a sudden you can see the matrix, right? And you start to unlock things. So on its own, this word, the underlined G, the long A, that's a single vowel, the long A, and the T, it's a three-letter word. This is a sockeye salmon. And I'll do that indigenous thing where it's like, okay, I'm not trying to brag, but we claim the sockeye, and it's the best salmon. it's the best. I'm like, I'm not trying to brag. I'm trying to tease because I hear people say stuff like that because I was in a meeting about a week ago and someone was like, well, yeah, I practice basket weaving and our people, we're the best basket weavers. We're just the best. And I was like, oh, come on. And it just reminded me of this other meeting I went to where this guy stood up and he's like, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but our people are the best hunters. I was like, get out of town. That is bragging. Okay, anyways. So the saak is God. God.
God,
God.
God,
God.
God.
Well, a couple of things. We have this underlined G, so this g sound is back there. And if we want to practice it, we pretend to drink water. That's the sound, right? But when you sometimes you got to really sort of think about this sound and push your body to make this sound. And then you're going to focus so hard that this vowel is going to come out high. You're going to say, but, because you're just trying to like giving it your all. But you got to keep that thing low. But. Then this one, it's a pretty easy word. Heen. Heen.
Heen,
Heen.
Heen,
That is both water and river. So it kind of just depends on how people are, If someone says, ach, chitsa in heen, they're not saying, hand me a river, saying, hand me some water. We said, wait, heen yik. But if they're pointing at a river and saying in that river, they're not saying in a glass of water, right? So you get it through context, right? But that is one where it has two meanings. It can mean either one of those things. So when you have two words, so qat heen, that's two words. Sakai, river. Qat heen, qat heen. But if you smush them together, this is what happens. All the ones on the front, the ones you say first, those tend to all get smushed into a single vowel. So qat becomes qat. And that vowel is usually low. Chak would become chak. This does happen. Quch will become quch. The last part, you could have multiple nouns all smashing together, all doing the same vowel condensing. But the last one stays the same. So that's why this, and then what this I is, this letter I, it shows relationship. That relationship could be possession. So this is gukha, but it's ach gukhayi. So someone might say, oh, I just like that cup. It says Montana on it. You should give it to me. Ach tu wasagu we gukha. Konachye ke gukha away. Hike. Ach gukhayi away. No, it's mine. My cup. So it might show possession. But in place names, it shows a relationship. So for example, just like in English we wouldn't say Sakai's river, we'd say Sakai River. So Tlingit does a similar thing to that, where you could say Hini. That would be that Sakai owns that river. But in this case, you have Qatini, where it's becoming a compound noun. And that's just showing a relationship between those two words. This is the same type of suffix, though, that would show possession. There's a set of rules on how to make it. We could learn that. We might do it today, but we'll see. We might just focus on like directional location. One thing a day. Let's see how we do. Any questions about that? Okay. Next one, we're just going to say the next one, and then I'm going to kind of show you the parts that are in there. Oh, and there shouldn't be a tone mark on that. KTOO. KTOO.
Kach, Digu, Baheen.
KTOO.
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 So there is this and this in there. So you are going into the special area in your throat to grab those sounds. So there is a verb, which is, you'd usually say it like this, KTOO. And what this verb is talking about, like say if you scoop some water out of a glacial river, like there's a river called X'éig, and that flows right off of this big glacier. Oh, you okay? I just caught the salmon thing in the chat. That's funny because it's saak. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so KTOO, what this refers to, like, okay, let's say a big river comes out of a glacier, right? Like a lot of flow, some rapids and stuff. That glacier had produced, there's just lots of silt around a glacier. And then when you have a fast moving river, it just churns everything up and around. So if I took an aquarium, like a little aquarium, and I just sort of scooped out some water and set it down on a table, it would just be all murky and silty. You would see it in that water. And if I just let it sit long enough, it would all settle. All the sediments would settle. And that would be KTOO, the water that has settled clear. So what this does is there's a couple things that do pop up in this one. And so those are the things that sort of change. And now you've got these different parts. So sometimes when we're learning Tlingit and we're starting to sort of get the hang of things, we start to say, okay, let's start just sort of pulling these words apart to see what's in there, then snapping them back together. The idea behind this is important. You cannot memorize the Tlingit language. You just cannot. I think there's some people who have amazing memories and they can do whole speeches and whole stories, and that is wonderful. That is a great place to start. At some level, you have to understand how the language works on the inside. And then you have to sort of convert that grammar into Tlingit fluency. And so that's the journey. That's the journey that everybody's going to go on who wants to become a speaker of Tlingit. But you have your own sort of options in terms of how you approach it. You could totally just nerd out on the structure, and there's people who like to do that. You can also just sort of say, I don't understand how this thing works, but this is how it goes, and I can run with that. And there's plenty of folks who do that as well. Or maybe you're somewhere in between. But basically, the things that you have here, this attaches to a verb and refers to a horizontal surface. So Tlingit does a lot of things with a horizontal surface and a vertical surface. For example, the word tsaa is a board, like a chunk of wood that's been made into a board. So a floor is called tsaa on the board, and a wall is called tsaa, face of the board. Board face, board on. That's really how the language is working right there. Those two things, if you start looking at verbs, you'll see a whole bunch of verbs that have ka in it somewhere. Pretty good chance that that's the horizontal surface. There's a couple other ka things, but we'll get to that later. And if you say ya in there, especially like a yauditi, it's in there, right? And so you'll start to spot these things. Sometimes it doesn't always make sense. Like you say yahwutlaq, it's in there, the yah is in there. It's a vertical surface, but that verb means to obtain it, to succeed, or to defeat someone. So ka is a horizontal surface. Ka is something that gets activated in verbs for a bunch of different things. It's used to sort of put the verb into a different mode. Sort of like in English, you could put ed or ing or an s onto a verb those things don't necessarily have meaning, they have kind of function. Or you can certainly argue about that, but I would say the same thing with this. So sometimes it's a command, sometimes it's what we call a hortative, like let it happen. So when you say yeyati, it is that way. Yenqati, let it be that way. So that qa sound is in there. And if this ever contracts, it will turn into an underlined X. It happens all the time. So for example, you might have a phrase, I'll write it down here. Qunne. So these parts is how you would sort of say, let's start walking. Let's start walking. Like if we're all sitting around, well, we know we're supposed to go somewhere, but we're just chatting and you're trying to tell us it's time to go, you might say this phrase. So that's going to turn into a period, that glottal stop, and then this is going to contract to an underline X. Qnechtuat. Let's get going. Let's start going. So that's how you would do that, right? And there's a bunch of stuff. Sometimes when we look at this stuff, it does get a little confusing, but just there's a long-term process to all of this. Well, di is the classifier. We'll talk about that. Every verb has one. It has functions, mostly with grammar. Qu, in this case, is the verb for something to settle in water. This w pops up, and it looks exactly like this one above it, because you can have I or u. That's basically how you'd make things possessed, right? But this one is a little different, and what it does is it takes a verb and says it's a verby noun. So it's a noun that does this verb. So that's why you have kach dequuhin. It's a river that runs itself clean. This is the small one that comes down. It crosses just north of UAS. It crosses the road just north of UA, or just inland, not north, just inland from UAS. And then it joins this larger one called Woosh Ichtuchuhin, which, I'll put down here. And I'm not going to be saying the colonial names that have been put on these things, but I will write them over here. So I don't know why we're saying this person's name. Just so much. And this is runs itself murky river. So those are two related sort of concepts. When we think about rivers, water, things like that. Oops. So we're going to jump down to this one, because it's kind of tough to say. So we're going to take it up a level. Turn the difficulty up to 7. So everybody say wooch. Wooch. Wooch.
Wooch.
So if you have, so here's a couple of things. Wooch and whoosh are the same thing. This is the same thing, okay? Basically, if the next thing starts with a vowel, you're going to usually use wooch. If the next thing starts with a consonant, you're usually going to use whoosh. For example, you would often say wooch in, or you could say whoosh tin, and those are saying the same thing. So wooch in and whoosh tin mean together. So, and then there's usually a verb that follows. Wooch in, ye chikachtune. We're going to work together, right? If you didn't have that, so for example, wooch in, we'll create 2 examples here. Wooch in, ye chikachtune. So this is a future verb. We are going to work together. But if I said, and if I just didn't put the een in there, I would say wooch ye jigach tu. Now there's got to be a change. Wooch ye jigach tu dene. That would be, we're going to work on each other. Like I'm gonna help you with your thing, you help me with my thing, and these are maybe like we've got some grief we got to deal with or something. You usually wouldn't use this verb to do that, but the key here is woochin or wooshin is different than wooch or woosh. They're related, but if woosh or wooch comes right before the verb, it means doing it to each other, right? Woochin gachtucha, let's eat. We're gonna eat together. Wuch gachtucha, we're gonna eat each other. Those are totally different situations. We really don't want the second one, right? So this one is this. Here's our tricky word of the day. X'éig. X'éig. X'éig.
Ishuhu.
X'éig.
Ishuhu.
If someone just gifted you some delicious herring eggs and you're eating them and practicing them, this is the part where they go flying out of your mouth, right here. This puts the ejective into ejective. So this sound, so when we make the L sound on its own, there's no voiced L in Tlingit. So if you catch yourself going la, la, ol, you're probably making a little mistake. Because the sound we're looking for goes shh, shh, shh. Tip of the tongue comes up behind the teeth. Everything has to be relaxed. Your cheeks, you can't have tense cheeks. You can't have a tense tongue. You gotta stay relaxed. Then you blow out the sides and you get shh. But if you hold your breath, you can't blow out. You just cannot make that sound if you hold your breath. There's just not enough air to do that one. So what you have to do is your tongue is in that same spot like you're gonna make that sound, but you squish it. By squishing the tongue, you push air out the sides. And I hear kind of two main variations on this sound. The first one goes and so it's squishing. You do have to get a little bit of tension in your whole mouth, jaw area. And the second one has a little bit of a ring to it. So some speakers will go whichever one you want to do, whatever you're hearing from people that you listen to. A lot of the speakers that I listen to went the first way. So for example, we'll put someone else's favorite salmon in here, a coho. This, because then it's got kind of a little bit of an easier ending. So this one is ook. 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 There's a verb root which means to, well, I guess we'll just do, it's garbage day in my neighborhood, so we'll do this one. So this is garbage, this is coho, two completely unrelated words, but we're focusing on this sound. So this one, so the TL sound goes, right? So like claw, ach, claw, TL, t, 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 sh, sh, sh. But whenever you combine those, the T is very fast. So you go cla, cla, cla. When that sound falls out of Tlingit, you end up with people saying, "This is my claw," like a claw, like a eagle claw. But you want a claw, not a claw. want to claw, right? And these things happen. So if someone says, my name is Gooch Claw, I don't want you to say, hey, that's an eagle claw. Like, just be gentle, be kind, be nice. But if you have a chance, you could say, oh, we learned in Tlingit class, like, that's a this TL sound. We can maybe practice that if you want to. It's always a delicate thing, because don't do it in front of, don't let anybody hear you. I mean, some people are fine just saying, oh, I'd love to learn more Tlingit, but it can get sensitive, right? Because I've also heard people say to to elders, oh, you're saying your name wrong. And I was like, what are you doing? Be quiet. So yeah, just be careful, use good judgment, use kindness, and sometimes just let stuff go. But to make this sound with holding your breath, there's a whole bunch of breathless talking going on here. This is the one that comes shooting out the front. So this one goes squishing out the side. This one goes shooting out the front. So for this one, let's go back to this one first. Only making that sound. Well, we'll just do this. Hold on. So I'm not saying a word. I'm just trying to make a sound. So I'm going to just put this vowel on here. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the same thing. Let me put a little symbol in here so we know. Okay. So our goal right here is just to make these sounds. So if I made this one with just an A vowel at the end, it would go ah, ah,
Ah.
ah,
Ah.
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 And it kind of drags out. You hear it kind of go. It just because like your mouth is going, ah, you know. But this one comes out fast. So this one goes ah,
Ah.
ah, ah.
Ah.
Here's what I think is going on in the mouth. So one, like this is a squishy, this is a clicky, right? There's a difference between those, and you want to make sure and it's, people do it all the time. They'll say, Luke. And I was like, oops, that's the wrong sound at the front of that. It should be ook. But again, don't go around correcting. If everybody's practicing Tlingit and you're practicing with folks you know, go ahead. But like a lot of times, if someone's giving some kind of speech and they say ook, you don't want to be like, choke, right? Just remember, be kind, right? So this one, though, does make that clicky sound. So I think what happens is the tip of the tongue comes up, and the tongue itself is all kind of relaxed. It's not like this real sharp, pointy tongue. So the tip of the tongue comes out. The tongue is kind of being relaxed it's a muscle, right? What happens is you're holding your breath, but you do have some air, and you can push air up without using your lungs, right? There's a whole bunch that happens in the neck. But what happens is that air starts to get pushed up. You start to push out the air that's in your mouth. You're not opening your lungs yet. Still hold your breath. Then the tongue comes up and closes the entire airway. So it comes up and just blocks everything, allows that air to build up and releases it. And that's what makes that clicking sound. So you end up with ah, ah,
Ka.
ah,
Ah.
ah,
Ka.
ah,
Ah.
eeg,
X'éig.
ook.
Two.
Okay. So now we have X'éig. X'éig. Wooch X'éig hin. Wooch ich uhin. Okay. There is a classifier in here. So the part is murky or silty, but it also is for fish to be spawning, especially herring, because they milt up the water. It's not silty, it's milty, right? And so, but that is something that happens, and so you could say, they are beginning to spawn. And that's important because then it means everybody get your boats ready. Gotta go get those herring eggs. So Wuch Ich Uhin it's a big river, right? And so part of reclaiming these names and putting these names back on the land is just doing a lot of teaching, how to make these sounds, how to say these words, and how, because there's going to be a lot of pushback from people who are just really colonized in their mind, and they'll say, well, nobody can say that. What if you got to call an ambulance? Yeah, it's like people can figure it out, right? People can figure it out. And then we can use this temporary, brief name for a little while longer. If someone says, where is that? Oh, it's that place that was briefly known as this other thing. That's what I think. Okay. So we're going to jump down to this one. So we've done áax'w. So this other word, tsak. This is one of these, we call them postpositions. It comes after a noun, right? So just like this. Like if I'm going to say, on the table. If I was going to use Tlingit grammar in English words, dump the word the, you don't need it, on the table, don't need the. You would say table on, table under, table around, me about, right? Or you actually say my about. And so that's one of the things that Tlingit does, is those types of words come after the noun, right? That's just a little different, no big deal. Nobody's backwards. It's just like, where does the word go? It goes here instead of there. No big deal. This is one of those types of words. And what it means is inland from it. So for example, if I'm standing at the shore of the ocean, I look up and I see this little lake, something behind that further towards the inland, away from the ocean. This is the name of that whole valley. That whole valley that's inland from the little lake. There's a whole road that loops around it. This area is called áax'w. áax'w.
áax'w, saak,
áax'w.
áax'w, tsaa,
áax'w.
áax'w, tsaa.
So if we have áax'w, we can add one more thing to that. And the word we'll add is glacier. The word for glacier is sit. Sit. áax'w, sit.
Sit.
áax'w, sit.
Sit.
And you do have, so you have an adjective at the end, an adjective at the beginning, an adjective at the end. That can get your mind a little bit scrambled. I was making a video last night. I got this little, oh, he fell over. I got a little puppet over there that a friend made. It's supposed to be my twin. Here it is. It's a little khone. It's got long hair. And my kids got super excited. They said, it's a daddy puppet. Anyway, so it was sitting there and like facing it, so you could kind of see it in the background of the video. And as I was working on this very name to teach it to folks, I said, it's 3 words. áax'w. But I put, see, do you hear that? I accidentally put that at the end because that just happens in your brain. Sit, and I caught myself doing it. So I was like, talk, sit. So I made a little thought bubble, and the little puppet goes clum, which is how we say whoops, and then sit is the third word. So you see, sometimes you just get 3 words in a row. They don't have to smash together. Awk, talk, sit. Questions? Everybody okay? Okay. So the next one, the name Awk extends to the bay as well. So if we go down, if we go out to sea a little bit from where this little lake is in this area, Kayaaní, this word ta is the head of a bay. So this is the head of the bay. So like if you think of when we say the head of the bay, that means the sort of like, so like let's say here's the land and here's the bay kind of coming out this way. I guess I don't know how to do this. And then the water's out here. So at whatever this sort of high point is coming into the mouth, into the bay, that's called the head of the bay. So this word means the head of the little river, or the little lake, sorry, but it actually is referring to the bay that's in front of us. So there's a number of different, there's some buildings and stuff, there's a dock that's right there. And so the ta part is the head of a bay. So this one is ta. Ta.
ta,
Ta.
ta.
And we just got, because again, our brain might sort of go, oh, ta. Just because it gets into this mode of making those, and that would be a king salmon. The other favorite fish, the other best fish, but and so ta. So now we're being very conscious about whether or not that apostrophe is there. It's very, I used to teach, like teaching the number 3. So the number 3 is nutsk. That K at the end is just a regular K. So many times I would say nutsk. Like, just because like my brain goes in, it's like, we have to pinch all of them now. And so it just, I think it's just something that happens. Okay, we're going to end with 2 big ones. Just in terms of like, they're just long. They're just long. No big whoop, no worry. So the word on is a village. It could also mean land that's inhabited. There are some words in Xingit that could mean multiple things. And you have these situations where like, sometimes there's a word like tree, right? And if you said it, os, people would have a particular tree in their mind, right? And some of this has to do with where you grew up. Like, so if you grew up on where there's a bunch of maple trees, if someone says tree, you might think, oh yeah, like a maple tree. Like you just might have an image of a tree in your mind. If you grew up in Hawaii, it's probably a different tree than if you grew up in Juneau, and it's probably a different tree than if you grew up in Colorado or something, right? So you do have that where you have these sort of default sort of things like os, a spruce tree is probably what most people think of. But then there's these other things where like, yeah, this word can mean multiple things. But if you said it, people will think of this, right? So if you said on, I would think of a village, right? So on, in this case, is a village. This ch is a suffix that can go onto a noun. And what this suffix says is that's the one who's doing the thing. So it marks the person who does the thing, right? So onch, that's saying the village did the action. The whole village did it. Then we have this thing which is the same one that we saw up there because we are looking at a verb. And then we have a classifier. And then we're going to use this fancy root marker now. Oops, what happened to my keyboard turned off. Okay, hold on, let me switch. I gotta back up. So we are going to use this root marker now and sue. So every verb has a verb root. That verb root contains the meaning. And then you can add things to the front of it to alter that a little bit. So at its core, like so this here's another one right here. We've looked at two verbs so far looking at these names. Qu, for sediments to settle. That's what that means. Tsu, this is to carry multiple stick-like objects. That's what it means. And your arms are sticks, in case you're wondering. You want to put one arm up? Saak. That's a command saying, put your arm up. But if you want to put both up, Su. Put both your hands up. So these are sticks. You can move them around. Now you get stick arms after today. But also, this is a word for a temporary migration. And this is where there's a lot of fun, I think, that happens here. There's a deeply embedded cultural meaning. We used to live in clan houses that were made of usually cedar, but if you go further north, they get cottonwood. Some areas are probably spruce. But where you'd make these boards, tsaa. And so the way that a house was constructed is you had all these boards that were going vertical all around the house. Really incredible science and technology behind house making in these areas. But it's built so that in the summer you could take the walls off the house. And you take the boards off and you carry them to go make a fish camp. You would build a fish camp out of the boards from the house. You would come back at the end of the summer and put them back onto the house. This was something that happened a lot. So this is why this word means to move temporarily. So this one, we're out of time, so we're just going to say the whole word, is the village that moved temporarily. Like the whole village did it. So this word, and this is this area. We don't have to call it this anymore. We can retire these names. We'll put them in a bentwood box. We'll give them back to somebody. It's like, thank you. That was interesting. But you can keep that. We're gonna take. We have a name already, right? It's like if someone gets your name wrong, and like let's say, oh, I don't really know what to do. That's socially awkward. But if a year goes by and they keep calling you by this different name, you might have to say, oh, actually, this is my name, right? And that's what we're going to do. So this one, to close us out, is áax'w.
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 So you do have this sound right in the middle. And qash is right there in the middle. áax'w. Goodness cheese, Shuhan. That was fun. We just did these 10 names. That's all we did today. That was enough. That was great. But using them, put them to use. Can't let these names go away. Cheesh.
Cheesh.
Goodness, cheese.
Cheesh.